Hey, what's up, guys? I want to welcome you to episode 47 of the Street Theology podcast. This is your boy, Pastor Adrian here. I am joined by someone who's always right there on the right hand, ready to go at any point in time. Pastor Derek Hayes, what's happening, man?
Nothing much, man. I'm glad to be here.
Glad you're here. And we are joined, man, 2 podcasts in a row right now.
Oh, my God.
2 podcasts in a row.
It's a streak. Be careful.
Yeah, keep it going. Michelle Warner. Michelle, what's happening?
Doing good.
You doing good?
Yeah.
Man, today we got a spicy episode for you. Episode 47.
Yeah.
And there's no better number, 47.
Okay, hit us with it.
Hit it in your number. Michael Irvin with the Miami with the Miami Hurricanes.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Play wide receiver for the Hurricanes. Hey, that was back in the day. They 47. That's a stanky wide receiver
I'm
number
telling
2.
you, bro, like,
47.
he upgraded to 88, bro, for real.
But let me tell you, when he upgraded that 47, because Michael Irvin was a dog out there. Hey, that's back in the day in football. They was wearing the half tops. They was wearing
crop tops.
They wearing the crop tops. The crop top jersey on, man. Hey, you can see the shoulder pads underneath. You know what I'm saying? Hey, and Michael, that's what I'm saying. And Michael Irvin was definitely out there. Them crop tops didn't go well for the defensive tackles, though. You know what I'm saying? Hey, but episode 47, we're excited today. We're going to be joined in just a few by my good friend, theologian, pastor, author, Adam Mabry from Aletheia, Boston. Yeah. Again, Pastor Adam pastors a credible church in Boston. He's an author of 2 books. I mean, he writes for national publications. I mean, one of the best thinkers that I know on the planet. I mean, one of the best theologians. I mean, again, knows Greek. I mean, New Testament scholar. I mean, he's a brilliant mind. And so we wanted to bring him in to talk on this idea of critical theory, critical race theory. It's a very hot button topic right now, and so we thought, hey, Street Theology, let's go there. And again, we this interview we did with him, it's a wide range of kind of topics that came with it. I mean, we started up high, then we ultimately went down low down there to get to some street level. So we're super excited to have him. And so, well, guys, here's the deal. Again, at Street Theology, it's really simply here to help you bring theology to a street level, helping you be an innovative reconciler. And so we want to encourage you, if this podcast is helpful for you, man, make sure you write a review, give us a rating, on iTunes, 5 stars only, please. On your iTunes or wherever you get your podcast from. And make sure you tune in, as well as we have our YouTube channel up and ready to go. So if you like to see, especially Michelle's beautiful face, you know what I'm saying? Then you can be able to, me and Pastor Derek, we average. So you guys see our average faces. We regular faces. Then you go check us out as well. But, so we're really excited. I guess before we jump in, because we had pre-recorded this interview and things like that. So I guess I'm going to ask you guys, like, man, the people, they're getting ready. They're anticipating critical theory. Everybody's anxiety probably always up. You got some people like, man, listen, this white dude better not say nothing sideways. You know what I'm saying? You got white people in there. This white dude better not say nothing sideways. So I went in through these 3 grenades to Pastor Adam and let him handle it. So I guess this the interview, again, it was really deep. What was kind of like, before we dive into it, what was one of your quick takeaways to prepare people for what they're about to listen to?
Yeah, I think the part that landed for me was you have feelings about your feelings, and so does the other person that you consider on the other side. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes those feelings are exactly the same. Mm-hmm. And I say this all the time to married couples, people in counseling, like, it's oftentimes the stuff that we don't say to one another. Those are the things that actually need to be said. And ultimately what that means is, this is how this is hitting me, because oftentimes what you're going to find is the person feels the exact same way, find some commonality, move forward.
Yeah.
I think for me, it was definitely more towards the end when we started talking about taking responsibility for the world around you. And, okay, if I see this thing, though it is outside of my context, and sometimes proximity is going to dictate what I'm responsible for. Yeah. If I see something, even though it might be far away, how can I take that, learn from it, and be able to apply or be proactive or prevent something like that happening within my context? I feel like it puts you in it forces you to be humble. I think that was the biggest thing. Is like, that's sometimes true. We have a super inflated view of ourselves of like, yeah, I can definitely affect all of these crazy things if I talk about this everywhere and say this to people who are higher in power than me. But I feel like it gives you it's like a cop-out, because then you don't have to take responsibility for what's directly around you. So I thought that was really good.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Michelle. It just was another reminder of something I said a while back, but then it kind of was brought back to me, this idea of the generation that's needed, the idea of going from, the Moses generation to now the Joshua generation, that people getting at a street level, because I think that's how it's going to be solved. I thought Adam thought the great point was that the fact of it's very easy to broad brush everything. Oh, this is all systemic, versus now when you do the hard work, say, oh, no, here, and here, and then let's get the work there to be able to do that. And I think that should not be, and again, you're going to learn. I think it should just be the fact of just, hey, black people, we should be the ones pinpointing this. I think all people, because if there's, just like there will be systemic issues that are oppressive toward women and other people groups, like, man, oh no, we should all be working, especially if you're a follower of Jesus, to not see those things happen, especially have power. But I think this is why I did love this podcast, because it took us up, but then by the time we ended it, we literally ended it, I think, at a street level. And so, guys, we hope you enjoy episode 47, this great interview with my good friend Adam Mabry. Well, Adam, welcome to Street Theology, man. Glad to have you.
Hey, man. Glad to be here.
There we go. Well, Adam, today we decided to bring you on, you know what? Because, hey, why not? Let's go ahead and throw, I figure, hey, if anybody needs to juggle grenades, it's my man Adam. So I'm about to pull 3 pins out of these grenades and toss them in the air. And we're going to talk about critical theory today.
Wait, that's not what you said. You said we were talking about ice cream. I'm out.
Well, that was the only way I was going to get you on here, So, but no, in all seriousness, and again, as I mentioned before, the reason why we bring you in again, not only someone who is a great theologian, but someone who actually thinks a lot about this stuff. Again, I always joke with people, and say this in all seriousness, one of the smartest individuals I've ever been around, in the way that you not only you understand information, but how you just run this through the lens of the Bible and the gospel, not only. And so, again, I thought there's no better person actually to jump into this and talk about it in the perspective of it. And so I think we just really kind of want to start off, man, just kind of giving people like a broad overview. We hear all it right now, critical theory, critical race theory, all this is the conversation today. So if you could, Adam, just in a broad stroke, just kind of like what really is like critical theory?
Yeah, great question. So critical theory refers to a way of looking at various disciplines that came from something called the Frankfurt School. And in particular, it's asking how power or a use of power shapes any particular thing. So we can talk about it maybe on 2 levels. One, it's like, is the history of the idea that we now call critical race theory or critical anything theory, and then like what it actually, what it kind of propounds, right? Mm-hmm. So 1950s, 1960s, you had some philosophers in Europe that got together. They were known now as the Frankfurt School, and they were earlier in life, they were Marxists. And so, and I don't mean that as like a slur. I realize some people say you're a Marxist to be a slur. They were literal philosophical Marxists, which means they believed that Karl Marx's view of the world as really seeing the world as like an economic thing primarily, having no room for God, and seeing the real struggle in the world between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and needing a revolution to bring about this communist utopia where everyone had everything they need from each man according to his need, ability to each one according to his need. That was it's religious or worldview in the way it explains everything. It's a total way of looking at the world, and it's very creative and very powerful. And a lot of people got really, really into it, especially in the century. Mid 1950s, they realized, oh, that's not really working, because the USSR was over there and they could see it's not really working. Mm-hmm. But they're looking at the West, and they're really hating how things that once were high culture have now been sort of distilled down and made cheap and available to everybody. They're bummed out by this. They just start to describe themselves as postmodern, and it's really a playing with of ideas. So you'll get, one of these fellows from the Frankfurt School viewed all of reality not as like an economic thing, like Marx would have suggested, but actually as a field of intersecting power dynamics. Okay, now it's starting to sound a little familiar. So let's go with that for a little bit. Another one said, famously talked about words and said words don't have any meaning intrinsic to themselves, but only in reference to other words. And so everything is a language game. Now it's starting to maybe sound even more familiar. And so you get these ideas and you sort of put them in like the university water. And for a long, long time, they're just in there. You hear about them. Trying to read some of these guys is like trying to read, the ingredients to a shampoo bottle backwards. Like it's crazy. You can't really understand it. And so
Thought it was just
no one really pays much attention to that. But then in the 1980s, something called critical legal theory is actually developed here down the road at Harvard. And it's a way of looking at the law, asking the question, how is racism built into certain laws, right? And the first time that question's ever really been asked, even though obviously we're done with Jim Crow, or done with civil rights, that's all, we're all downstream from that. But this is the first time someone said, okay, so there are perhaps some laws that are out there that aren't explicitly racist, but their effect is to in fact be racially disparaging, obviously toward African Americans or non-white people generally. All of us are a lot of aware of some of these things like redlining, or where we choose to book interstates, or zoning law, stuff like that. That's totally right. Like it was very obvious, like, oh, some of these are just racism by another name, right? Well, so all of that is making good sense. And then these ideas kind of get weaponized is too strong of a word, but they get marshaled into other domains of academia, like English and the growing field of women's studies, and then queer studies, and then all these other kinds of studies. And what it does is it kind of blows up into viewing the entire world through a different kind of total worldview, where instead of looking at the world like Marx did, as everything's a economic function, or everything, something like that, now the world is to be viewed as a language game, and everything is to be viewed through the lens of power. And so then the goal of life is to discover who has power, like who has more power and who has less power, and then to set yourself up as the liberator. So to take power from those who have it and to give it to those who don't, and thereby to create a revolutionary new world. And so in that way, critical theory can be a totalizing worldview. It can be deeply ungodly, and it can propound a way of bringing about a heavenly version of the future that the Bible totally abhors. Namely, Jesus never tells us to be revolutionaries. We're not supposed to do that. So to love our neighbor, serve our neighbor, not burn down their house. So that's kind of the history of it. In practice today, now what I don't mean by that is everybody who subscribes to any point of critical race theory wants what I just described to happen. Okay, I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm simply saying that's like, it's a matter of historical fact. Like those ideas just are all connected, right? Critical race theory, particularly, is coming up in reaction to a lot of the colorblind kind of language that was popular in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And it was made popular very much by the ideas of MLK, by Desmond Tutu. Like these, it's not like white people came up with this idea. It was what was thought at the time, I mean, you all probably remember at the time, that was thought to be like the avant-garde way to think about how we were going to achieve racial reconciliation in the country. What an effect that had was inadvertently give people who look like me, white people, an extra kind of privilege. And the privilege is, oh, since we're colorblind now, I really don't have to pay any attention to blackness or whatever your ethnic background or story might be. Doesn't matter anymore. So now I have the privilege of no longer caring. We're just all caring. Well, though the idea was never meant to bring that effect to pass, it has nonetheless brought that effect to pass. And it's been really hurtful, as you can imagine, to, and as I'm sure that you all have experienced, to non-white people, when someone who looks like me isn't even aware of the privilege it is to not have to be aware of your own skin color, right? And so then we come through, a bunch of racialized violence over the last few years, and these instances of police brutality or whatever. And I don't want to get into, specific instances, but the sum effect of that has been to go, okay, something about our racial past is coming back up, and the tools of colorblindness or the first round of civil rights don't seem sufficient. We need a tool to go hunting for hidden racism. Okay. And you can imagine culture looked around, and the only tool that was really ever made to do that was critical race theory. And so it was grabbed onto by a group of people. Ibram Kendi would be like a great example, and kind of propounded as the way to see the world. And for young people, particularly looking for a way to understand all of reality, it can be very, very attractive because it identifies a very clear evil, whiteness. It identifies a very clear way to fix it. You got to get woke. That's like getting saved. And then you gotta agitate or become an ally, or, you got to deconstruct, or you got to, problematize, or whatever these verbs are. That's like sanctification. And then the goal, the heaven, is equity, where everybody has the exact same outcome. And in that way, it does smell a lot like Marxism. And I don't mean that, again, I don't mean that as a slur. If you're Marxist, I guess that's a compliment, but that's its ideological history. And that's kind of my read on how it's become such a popular set of ideas.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a long answer to your short question.
I mean, I love the way that, especially toward the end, how you started to pick out the pieces of it that are story. Like every story has these elements in it. And I was wondering, when you said heaven, is that the same thing as a savior? Like what would be the savior in this particular?
Well, this is, to me, tragically ironic. So obviously, if you've read White Fragility, written, which I don't feel like I don't know that enough people know that it was written by a white woman. I just want to keep saying that because it's just hilarious to me. And so the savior in kind of the critical race theory story is the liberator. So whoever postures themselves as a liberator is the one saving the oppressed. Okay, so this is why it becomes really, really attractive to do two things. One, to locate yourself on the hierarchy of oppression. I'm a white dude, so I don't make it to the ladder, right? But this comes from the work of Kimberly Crenshaw, who first came up with the idea of intersectionality, and it was actually I think a very useful idea, which is to say, not every Black person has the same level of, cards stacked against them. Like some, might be a Black woman, or a Black woman who had this kind of background or grew up in this particular place, or a Black, and so you just kind of keep stacking up the intersecting lines of her own difficulties. And that was the idea. Again, a perfectly, I think, a reasonable idea way to understand people. But you line yourself up on that kind of intersectional hierarchy of who's most oppressed. And then you start becoming an ally of other oppressed people. That in that way you act as a savior. You begin to agitate for their rights. You begin to, push for something that looks like revolution. And then in that way you set yourself up as a savior. In the story of critical theory, whoever begins to become an ally of those who are perceived to be more oppressed than them act in a way as a savior of those peoples. What's ironic about that is that all of these ideas are products of white men. I mean, just think about the story I just told you. All this ideological, like the foundation of this entire project was designed by German white men, which I just find extra ironic. So and so now other people have obviously built upon these ideas and vamped upon these ideas, but it really is kind of constructed by people who eventually get sort of sainted as like saviors, and they're white saviors, which is the very thing that those who are most into this way of looking at the world don't want. And so it's a very conflicted way of understanding the world. But here's what's important, because I've been on a couple podcasts now talking about critical theory, and what I never want to do is, destroy it with flat facts and logic, which is unhelpful, because there's a reason why it's so popular. It's scratching a real itch. It's attempting to address a real felt need that I think we all know the ultimate answer to the need of those who are oppressed is the great liberator Jesus, right? Like we all need his liberating power, and those who are in positions of power need to act as Jesus would act toward the oppressed, of course. But I think it's important, especially for white pastors like me, to spend some time really reflecting on, okay, well, why though? Why is this set of ideas and this way of talking about the experience of non-white people in the United States, why is it so popular? It's not just a conspiracy. It's because it really resonates with something. And that's the thing I think we have to pay attention to.
Yeah. Do you think that's one of the reasons why there's so much anxiety in general in talking about it in the church? Because it kind of positions itself as almost like a counterfeit gospel. It's like this could function in that way, give people that sort of sense of belonging in it. I don't know if you feel like that's part of the reason there's anxiety about it. But.
Because I think, Adam, I want to definitely answer that question about the anxiety, because I think the biggest, thing I hear today is that you use words, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel like right now if I went on Twitter and I literally just tweeted, I thought about doing this one day. I was like, hey, Karl Marx, critical theory, like just random words, right? No, it just random words, people's perspectives of you now. Because now if you say critical theory, critical race theory, Karl Marx, anything like that, you're now in this camp.
Yeah.
And I think the crazy part about it is that the same people who complain that, hey, this group over here, this critical theory, whatever group, woke camp, puts them in a box. Now well, we're going to put them in a box. And I'm like, instead of just like, there's so much anxiety around, and it's what you're saying, Adam, is that this is a theory, and there's parts of the stuff that was good. Now, what I think me and you agree on, and we can get this later, is I think the solutions many times of this, of like how this practically plays out in the streets of critical theory, is not great at all. But I think the idea, though, it is to discover something. So it's like, how did we get here, and why do we have so much anxiety? Because it's like, at the end of the day, now, it's just creating such this divide. Mm-hmm. And so why do you think that is?
So if the question is, why do I think it's creating a divide, is because the idea is itself extraordinarily divisive. So it goes something like this. Like as a white person, I have to hold in my head things that can't be true at the same time. I have to hold in my head logical contradictions, that at once I am constantly and only and irreconcilably racist, but I have to work to be anti-racist. Those two things can't happen. Like if I am, just by virtue of my skin color, according to white fragility, I am irreconcilably racist. The best I can do is to become like obsequiously an anti-racist, but never actually achieve my own purification, right? I have to now use language that is describing the way of the world in a way that's totally new to me. But if I question any of it, then I don't believe in the language. Does that make sense? Like those two things can't go together. And so it's filled with these logical contradictions that that are for those who like to think like me are really difficult. And then when someone like me asks a question, immediately, I'm a racist. The other reason it's divisive is because it's really not great to tell a whole group of people that they're racist. Like, I'm not the most relationally intelligent person I know, okay? I'm not the most pastoral person I know. But I do know that if I walk into someone's house and say, by virtue of their last name, they're all just a bunch of racists and there's nothing they can do about it, we're probably not going to go bowling later. Like we're probably not going to be the best of friends. Like it's so that's even if it were true, boy, that's a really difficult way to say it. And so in that way, critical theory, the third reason it's divisive is because it relocates that word from a posture of the human heart proven by actions, the way we've always understood like sin in the West, and not even in the West, the way anyone's always understood sin, to a state of being that you cannot change. And in that way, it becomes like this very odd purity religion, like all the worst stuff about fundamentalism, except without any of the grace or Jesus or forgiveness or way back or any of that stuff, or unity, and ultimately, I think this is the major problem. It has no love. Yeah. There's nothing in it that demands I love my enemy. And at different times, we are all each other's enemies. We've all hurt one another. And so in the Christian story, the highest ethic is to be like Jesus, right? To lay down my life. And so that becomes really hard to do when no amount of doing that will actually get me accepted into the new world that such a theory is trying to promulgate.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this question, because here will be my not pushback from that side of what you said, but on the other side of it, answer this question for me: is that those who sit on the side where I get what you're saying. Well, that's why when I work in the areas I work in, I don't walk into an organization or an institution and say, hey, this institution is full of white supremacists. I don't do that because I don't know you. Mm-hmm. And again, could there be parts of systems and things like that? Yes, and we can talk through those systems. But to say an individual, you know what I mean? Because I tell people on the other side, just because an individual, this could be some things in the system, but an individual, I deal with individual on their individual merit and kind of go from there. But what I will say is on the other side of it, why is there such high anxiety, or not high anxiety, but on the side now where, yes, people feel divided, they feel they're put this box, but also I think it causes a divide, in my opinion, but we'd love to hear your thoughts, is that on the other side of this is that it feels like people, even when this wasn't going on, that it can seem like, especially in evangelicalism, that a lot of people did not care about it. I'm not saying it's broad, but they didn't care about it. So I think so, because here's what I try to say to people is this. I'm like, one of the biggest groups that's leaving the church or not want anything to do with Christianity at a very high level in our country are Gen Z African-American men and women. And here's why, because there's no one's giving them an answer for systemic things that, Adam, you had mentioned, oh no, there are things in systems that aren't blatantly racist, but they do hinder people from growing. But now there's no answer. Now it's just the fight. And so I don't know if that makes sense. I don't even know what question I'm kind of asking, but it's like there's another side to this versus it only being, yes, critical theory does push this, but then on the other side of it, there's a reason why people are pushing it, even the church world.
Yeah. Well, let me see if I can maybe respond to some of those things. I think, so in my answer to the previous question, I said, why it's difficult I'm sure for white people to hear that. The other reason that it's difficult for white people to hear that we're all racist is because deep down, most white Americans are kind of worried we are. Here's what I mean. If you have a conscience, I'm 38 years old, white American. I love America. Say the Pledge of Allegiance. I've lived in other countries. I like this one the best. Okay, I like this place. I love the story of America. I'm deeply ashamed of the way we've treated Black people in this country. That's shameful. Shameful. We invented an entire way of talking about humanity. By the word, we could have a really long discussion about what the word race even refers to, because I don't think it refers to anything that exists. It was invented to gather a bunch of people together so that people who look like me could oppress them. But before that, we didn't think about dividing people along their melanin content. That was not the way slavery ever worked. It was not the way divisiveness ever worked before. It was always along national lines or where you came from. So I know that stuff and I feel terrible about it. And so there's this haunting shame that exists. I mean, if you think of America as a giant family and you think of this as our family history, boy, you just are kind of ashamed of the parts of your family history that are in fact shameful. And I know that on the part of a lot of white Americans who are really reject anyone who speaks in the language of critical theory, this is part of the reason why, because it's just man, I feel like I already repented. I'm doing my best. This just tells me there's nothing I can do. It's very hopeless, right? And so that also, because at some point there is a kind of conviction, right? If you accuse me of eating someone's dog next door, I wouldn't really think about it because no, right? But if you accuse me of perhaps unknowingly being really unkind to someone yesterday, I'd be like, ooh, did I? Do you know what I mean? That's far more plausible. And therefore, I think it just resonates, and it's also part of the reason a book like White Fragility is sold so much, bought by mostly white people, because it's almost right in its description, which I feel like is my major beef with critical theory. It's almost right. It points at a real set of problems, and it almost describes them accurately. It points at a way forward, and it kind of gets it, but it's not specific enough, and it's not Christian enough. So, to answer your question, Adrian, more maybe acutely, when we say something like racism exists in systems, yes, what becomes very difficult is to say, and here it is. So sometimes, like I know in the work you do, Adrian, you're going to examine a corporate structure closely and go, maybe like right here and here and here. But when you say systemic racism exists, you're not going, everything about this company is race. Like that's not zoomed in enough. It's not enough particularity. But you can look at a couple of things and go, these three things though, these aren't helping, right? And we can really work through that. And and then you're talking with people like, okay, what is this policy? How did this hiring practice come into place? Why do you ask this particular question? Have you thought about this? And it can be a really helpful discussion, right?
Yeah.
But when we say things like America is systemically racist, it's not dialed in enough, because it's not true that every system in America is racist. It's just not the case. It's certainly the case that parts of some are, and so the harder work is to go, okay, and right here, right there, in the way this law is applied or this particular bill in this particular state, that's the work that really needs to be done. And here's the thing, it can't be done unless we love one another enough to talk about it. So if I'm a white legislator and you're a black legislator, we like each other, we're working across the aisle or something. And in principle, we're both like, yeah, racism, that's awful. Let's get rid of that. If we are so divided by this black and white kind of digital 1-0, it either is or isn't the case, that all law is racist, like we can't really fix anything, because the only answer then is to burn the whole thing down, which is why that's kind of where it ends up going. But if I love you, I'll press in and go, okay, how do you see that? And that's the hard work, and that's the heartbreaking part of where a lot of this discussion ends up, because it's hard to really
Yeah, no, and you're spot on. And I think the thing, and that's why, Adam, one of the things that we work together and we do well together is because one of the reasons why I want to bring you on is because of the idea of just the real, the knowledge of it, but also there is such this very logical, practical side. Okay, hey, here's how this works. For me, I like to get to the underneath side of it. And one of the things is that anxiety drives black or white thinking. And so in our world today, anxiety drives black or white thinking. So it's this. So the issue I see in America, I see in church in America, it's black or white thinking. It's, okay, either everyone's racist or the other side of it, it's like if you do say that there are systems of racism, then you're unfaithful to the gospel and you're a Marxist, and you're like, no. That's why when you walk in, that's why the whole thing of being a non-anxious presence, when you walk into a place, say, no. That's why I walk into an institution and I can say, hey, if the end goal, I don't want this to have systems or places of racism in these corporations, I can walk in and say, okay, hey, like Adam said, this, and this. Oh, here's some really good stuff you're doing, but this, and this, here's why, and here's the reason why it happens. And now they can make a choice of what they want to do. Because, again, that statement keeps standing out to me when I heard the other day. It is very easy to control versus to love someone. And it's easy to just control. And that's where, and so I think anxiety is driving such this conversation now. And what the sad thing is going to happen is that I think we have an opportunity in this country to actually, where the kingdom of God should truly be modeled in this moment, where the world is looking for hope in all these different places. They can't find it in these places. We can actually be it, but yet still, we're still driven so deeply by our anxiety now that now we're just stuck, and we're just now joining into the rest of the culture war of the rest of the world has done. And now I tell people all the time, when you just rail on people for critical theory, let me tell you this, you are not helpful. When you just rail on someone and just say, hey, without talking to them, you're a white supremacist, you are not helpful. And what I say is this, when you do that and it's done in that place, you are now no longer working in a place of a kingdom perspective. You're now working in the way of the empire, because that's how the empire is functioning right now versus the kingdom. It's this. And so I think that's the underneath part of it. So, I mean,
No, I was really just going to kind of agree and say it's almost, to me, it's like playing double dutch. It's like, who's going to go first? Because we're missing this whole thing of, like, I know that sometimes the way I feel, I won't put it on all black people, but it's almost where Pastor Adam, where you were coming from is like, hey, this is why this is difficult for me as a white guy. For me as a black man, it's like, well, nothing that I seem to bring as solutions ever seems to matter anyway. If we, I can look at civil rights, I can look at all this stuff and say, yeah, we still have all these laws, we still have all these things, and nothing ever seems to work. And as soon as I bring a solution, it's never good enough. So I think some people are just kind of throwing up their hands, and I would agree where it's like, hey, it's like playing a game of double dutch. Like, who's going to be empathetic first? Because we're missing the fact that we're missing each other. Both have great sides, but it's like, well, who's going to go first here in the empathy game where we need to have the conversation?
That's a really interesting way to put that, because as I've done, when my wife and I have been in some stuck spots, we've taken advantage of Dr. Mike Soda's brilliance down there with you guys. And one of the things he likes to say is, typically when two people are having a conflict, when you dig down deep enough, you find out they both feel the exact same way.
Yeah, right.
And it's like, yeah, totally. It's like nothing. You get kind of white America and black America, and I think it could be accurately said, both, if they were being honest, could say, I feel like nothing we do is good enough. Like, nothing we do is actually going to fix the problem. Nothing we do, like, we're both saying the same thing, which on the one hand is actually kind of encouraging. It's like, oh, okay. So if we both feel that way, and none of us are really excited about what we're trying right now, what could be another thing? And that's another symptom of anxious thinking, black and white thinking, but also a lack of creativity, like mental stuckness. And yeah, that I think is also a feature of our discussion. I mean, here, I promise you the following thing is going to happen. Someone is going to listen to me say whatever it is that, I've said in the last few minutes, and whatever it is you all have said in the last few minutes. And Adrian, you're going to get an email. I promise you. And I know for a fact I'll get a few. And it's going to be someone who's saying, hey, I can't believe you said or didn't say X or Y. And what they're really responding to isn't what you and I maybe have said. What they're responding to is their own emotionality about what you and I have said. And instead of being able to control how they feel and process that in a helpful way, they're going to want to adjust the world around them so that they feel better. And in this way, I think we are really, really stuck. We're really stuck. And it's going to take some creative, non-anxious gospel thinking to model what it could look like to get unstuck.
No, and I think you're spot on. And I think that, and this is probably a question, is that when you think about, so I think, you used marriage earlier. Like, I know there's been times where, like I know in my own marriage, one of the things that early on, because of my own struggles with mental health, things like that was very wearing and that was very hard for my wife, Wendy. Well, one of the things Dr. Zodas talked to us about is like, hey, because of some of the things that I caused, what I'm saying, the fears, her worrying about, man, something's going to happen to me. Am I going to do something to harm myself? All those things. And I've moved forward and gotten better. She still felt the effects of that. So one of the things he constantly said was like, hey, you have to lean in. He's like, you're going to have to do more work because of what's happened. And I think so many times it's just both worlds. What I do when I go work with people, it's more of me saying, hey, as a black man, I don't have to really do this because people we've dealt with have, again, people who look like me, the stuff we felt within our country. But I lean in because as a Jesus follower, I know what's best. So I lean into someone, but also I let those people who are white and who have power say, hey, but you also have a responsibility. Yes, you may have didn't do this, but there are things you've benefited from. Now you know what you have to do. Your power you have, it's super important that you actually leverage that power to be able to give it, to help lift others up. And I'm not talking about in some like socialistic way, but no, you freely should be willing to give that up because of what has been systemically done to take your power and what power that's been there. And I think that's the big struggle. I'll say this, Adam, that's the biggest struggle that most black people that they just wrestle with right now, because they're like, black people were oppressed. And then when they see those who are white with no even sympathy, take empathy out, even sympathy, it's like, well, all the laws are fine, it's a meritocracy, all this stuff like that. And you're like, yeah, Chief, like that doesn't make me feel better, and so I guess the question becomes is that how, and I would ask this as a black man, how do we actually get those who are white to move. Like, how do we get, because now it's people are digging harder trenches to now it doesn't matter. Anything that's said about race or anything, now you are unfaithful. See, that's the problem, and I'll be honest, I have, is that as soon as you start talking on the issues of people being black and issues of black people, the thing that's happened through history in our country is people begin to now question your fidelity to the Bible. That's happened through history, and it's happening right now. And so, how do you, as people who are black, we're saying, no, we want to reconcile, but how do we do that when as soon as you talk about, hey, anything with racism, anything with systems, people are going to start to question your fidelity to the gospel?
Oh boy, that's a good question. Essentially, ask me how to fix it.
Yeah, speak for all white people in America, because I'm used to doing that when I walk into a room. Like, hey, what does black people think? Yeah.
So, I think I'm going to intentionally try to just speak for myself. I think if the question is how do we get other white Americans of goodwill, right, to have a meaningful discussion about race such that things get better? Would that be an accurate formulation of the question you just asked me?
Yep.
I wonder if it would help, and this isn't me promulgating this idea, I'm thinking out loud now. I wonder if it would help to use different words. It's like the word evangelical has gotten so stretched to mean so many different things. I no longer use it, even though I think I am one, but it depends on what you mean by that word, right? So like there's a definition that was given 50 years ago, and it's like evangelicals are like biblicists and activistic and conversionist and like, oh yeah, I'm all into that. But like, if by evangelical you mean like, a tool of the Republican Party, like, no, not that. So what do you mean? It's like, what do you mean by that word? So I wonder if sometimes our words have gotten so blown out that they're useless. So like when we say, how do we fix racism, or how do we get white people to lean in on racism? I wonder if we can dial up the specificity. And if we were to say, recognizing like, I don't know the answer to your question. I have no idea how to get white people in America to do anything. I don't know, make a Gap ad about it, I guess. That would help us, I suppose. Sorry. Feels like low-hanging fruit. I'll make a joke for you. So, but I can think, like, if you were to ask me, hey, in this particular instance, its outcome seems to be unfair or impartial. Now that sounds like a far less toxic question. So it's like, hey, policing. Okay, let's talk about policing in Tallahassee, Florida, because I don't know, let's say I was there with you, and we were both in a position to talk about that. If the question was formulated instead of how can we make policing less racist? Well, to answer the question, you have to believe that it is racist. And I would go, I don't know anything about it. I don't know. I'm not sure I believe that the question is even valid. But if you were to say, hey, how do we make policing more just and more fair so that it helps everybody and not just a group of people, because it seems to have a negative effect over here? I actually think that's a far less toxic way, scary way to ask that question. And that doesn't just go for people of color talking to white people. I think that the reverse is very, very important, because for me to say, as a Black person, how do you like? It's just like what you just said, Adrian. Like, hey, could you speak for all non-white people just real quick for me? Which is like, no, I can't. I can talk because it's me. I can ask a specific question about like you in this instance. How did this affect you? Because you are the only lens through which I'm going to know yours. I can't know white people, as a group, or Black people as a group. I can know some of them, and through those relationships, I can know what they know. And in making myself a friend of people who are different than me, I can actually learn things. Now, I know the accusation that's going to come. But it's a move of white power to take everything and make it at the individual level instead of the systemic level. But the thing is, systems are built by individuals. They don't exist without individuals. It's like saying, I want to talk about a brick building, but not about bricks. It's like, well, okay, but we have to talk about bricks. The whole
Yeah.
building is made of brick. And so it seems to me it seems to me that maybe in the 60s, 70s, all the low-hanging fruit was picked.
Mm.
You know, like, we changed the laws. Okay. Generation later, we're like, oh, well, that worked. That was good. But there still seems to be some stuff going on. And what we want to do is apply the same kind of civil rights, marchy, federalistic solution. Problem that's maybe far more like local. Like, it might be the case that Boston's racist in worse or different ways than Tallahassee or Omaha or wherever, and that problems that are here aren't problems that are there. And it takes me being responsible for where I am, and maybe in that way, like, loving my neighbor. Again, this is just me thinking out loud here.
Yeah.
It seems to me I'm being an unfaithful Christian if I care about humanity and justice and race, but I don't know my neighbors.
Yeah.
Because humanity is easy to love. Humans, oh my gosh, we're awful.
Yeah.
Very difficult to love.
I think you're spot on, and I think the part that I want to put a pin in that is what you just said. And that's what I have felt. I have felt that since Dr. King, I would say he was Moses. Everybody said he was Moses, and he saw it. But I feel like what's happened has been like this generation. I think there was a generation that just wandered in the wilderness. And then I think what happened was that then it came back that people now are still trying to approach the work like that. And like some are trying to approach the work like how it happened back then, right? Again, marches, rallies, all those things. Again, I look at it. I mean, people can say what they want about how it was done or whatever. I'm not for looting, rioting, whatever. But with the death of George Floyd, it sparked something across really the world. It wasn't just here; it was across the world. And I think now it's actually the real work is like the Joshua generation, right? You think about it, when Joshua and they went into the Promised Land. Dr. King talked about the Promised Land. You talked about walking in the Promised Land. They went. It was like 31 kings in the land, and they went piece by piece together to conquer those different king land. And what Adam's ultimately, I agree with you. It's more local. It's more now we're going after this. Okay, now we're going here. It's local here versus this broad stroke. But I think the issue becomes at hand is when I think where you see a real frustration, especially among those who are black and who are Christian, is when you have really people who are white will say like they can't even agree that this even exists anymore, or that this is like or this is a push from the progressive left. I'm like, yes, the progressive left have weaponized this stuff. It still doesn't mean it's not here. But my whole thing is forget the progressive left, forget whoever you want to point to. My question for church, like, okay, what are you doing? Because if you don't think this exists and you don't think there is a real still an effect, like we believe literally through the sin of one man, the entire world was infected with this disease called sin. Sin has generational effect. It has systemic effect. And so now it's like, oh, I agree with that. I'm like, no, we have to go piece by piece. And now how do we hit it from a very local, ultimate standpoint? Because I think it's that. And I think we cannot apply what the generation before did. And I think what this generation is doing, they'll say, this isn't my grandparents, this isn't my parents, my grandparents' civil rights movement. But it's not. I think they can have more freedom, more angst about it. I think they have more, because again, there's a level you only could go back then. Now, I mean, they can say, well, kids have the freedom to do that because of what others done before. But I think to take a step deeper, the new generation it's like, how are we actually getting into all these different places to really see change and pinpointing real issues? Like, no, here's an issue, let's deal with it. I think the Joshua generation has to kind of rise up, especially specifically in this instance. So
I think maybe that's as like Pastor Adam said, I'm just kind of talking this out. What do you guys think about this idea? Because I think I 100% agree in terms of like, hey, we must break it down in smaller pieces. I keep going back to that thing where it's like, well, you're telling me that you get to switch the rules all the time because you want to play the numbers game when it suits you. So if you say like, well, it's not fair to talk about something where I don't know if it's happening as a whole, Yeah, that's one thing, but I'm like, yeah, but if we're just looking at the data, like you told me to look at the data when it came to policing and how many people get shot and things like that, like you're telling me unempathetically to look at the numbers, but when I say, hey, look at that systemic number, let's go after that, I can't, like you're saying, I still can't get the movement. I think the question that you were asking before is much more of that. The way I'm feeling it hits me is, yeah, but you keep switching the rules. So even when I want to go after what I would consider low hanging fruit, like that number, you told me to pay attention to numbers. Here's the number. Let's go there. Mm-hmm. But then it's still not an issue. No, that's not an issue. So I'm like, well, what do you?
Well, here's the thing. When there's a recent thing that came out, there's a $220 billion wealth gap. Mm-hmm. Among people of color, like, there is a reason why that's there. When the 5 largest landowners, white landowners in the world, own more land than all black people combined, like, those are like real things that actually go to whatever. I still think what you're saying, when you start talking about, hey, let's go after this, then it shifts. And my biggest question, I'm just trying to figure out, like, how can we get somewhere together? Mm-hmm. I'm with it, but what are we gonna go do? Like, tell me what we need to go do, and do that. And I think here's the other, and this is the one thing I'll say, and I want to pass to Michelle, is that when it's all said and done, like, what breaks my heart in this whole process, and it always has, is that we have all we're moving forward, we're trying to go forward, and yet and still, you know what, the church, there's a reason why generations are grabbing a hold. If you don't like critical theory, it's a reason why, is because we have not given this generation an answer that's different.
It's the power vacuum.
We've not given anything different.
Yeah.
So you know what? There's been no civil rights. There's no Christian civil rights group since the Southern Christian Leadership Coalition of Dr. King. So you want to rail against Black Lives Matter? Well, we abdicated our responsibility. Mm-hmm. There was no other option. There's no other option. Back then, and in its imperfections, and there were so many incredible things, the Southern Christian Leadership Coalition, it was founded on this idea of Jesus principles and the things of the kingdom to actually go after these things, and there's been nothing. Mm-hmm. So we blame a thing, but we've not given them any solutions. Mm-hmm. And that's what's really hard. We're blaming everything, but there's no solution. And I think that makes it a very difficult thing.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm definitely still processing. There's so much about all of this that frustrates me, I think, because I feel like it's a conversation that we've been having for a really long time. Mm-hmm. And I'm in the same boat as all of you guys in terms of what does it look like to have a practical solution like that generates movement, and even understanding that to a certain degree our mindset is very much like civil rights. Like, we want to have something grandiose and super compelling and everybody on the same page doing something together, but how it's not necessarily going to work like that right now, I think is super sobering and helpful for people to understand. Like, stop trying to be MLK or Malcolm X. Like, that's not what this generation needs. And I think that's a super important starting point. Yeah. And so if that's where we start, and you say this all the time, everybody wants to change the world, no one wants to change the world around them. Right, it's like, okay, well then what part of the world have we been given, and what does it look like to take responsibility? And I think that's what it is for me, is like, what do I have to be responsible for to have real change in the people that are around me that are help building systems? What does it look like for Pastor Derek, for Pastor Adrian, for Pastor Adam to take responsibility in the unique places that we are at, in order for the people that we have direct contact with, who are responsible for systems that they contribute to have real change? Like, I don't know what that looks like. Yeah.
No, and I would ask that question to Adam, is that, Adam, for you, in the world that you do have, again, raising children, and raising white children. Let me ask you this question, Adam. How have you, again, you pastor an incredibly diverse church, not black and white. I mean, again, every time I walk into your church, it's like, man, it's literally the United Nations. When I walk in, as far as the representation that's in there. So your kids are growing from there. But Adam, how are you practically doing that in your own home? Because, we talk about the world we have. Okay, it's like, great. Okay, it's great. We're going to, because so many times we focus all the stuff outside, but I'm like, okay, well, what world we do have right now is here. So as with you and Hope, how are you guys actually helping your children, very specifically in this area?
Great question. Well, we try to teach our kids the Bible. And if you read your Bible, racism is a heresy. It's heretical. It's fascinating to me that it was immediately obvious and no one had to tell them. Like right after Pentecost, church's birth, it's immediately multi-ethnic, it's immediately multinational, it's immediately, they're going to places where they hated those people. Like you don't get too far down the road, and the church, they realize, oh gosh, we're not taking care of widows equally. We're taking care of Greek widows less faithfully than Jewish ones. Well, gotta fix that. Let's fix that. They fixed it immediately. They knew that was wrong, right? They didn't have to go, well, hold up. No, I thought, like, they immediately knew that was wrong. You get Philip going to Samaria. Guys, Samaria, it's difficult to describe how much Philip would have been raised to hate Samaritans. It would have been like Israel, Palestine, if you combined that with religion and family and race. Like it's all that. It's worse than that. And he immediately goes, oh, well, I gotta go to Samaria because Christians are going to come from Samaria. And then John and Peter follow right after. So it seems to me, step one, I teach my kids the Bible. All people are made in the image of God, and racism doesn't even make sense. And one of the nice things has been when I've explained that, at some point my children wake up to the fact that the world is this way, and their first reaction has always been the same. It's just one of sheer confusion. Like, wait, what? Because it doesn't make sense to them. So that's number one. Do we try to, live like reconciled lives? We used to talk about this a lot a decade or two ago. Like the responsibility of reconciliation starts in me. So if I can't live this way amongst my own friendships and relational network, like I can't lead anyone there. The third is, I would say, maybe I'll expand my answer to your question, Adrian, to some advice I would give. Is because we haven't talked a lot about solutions here. So I'm going to do the politician move and answer a different question than the one that you asked. Because I think it answers the question that you asked me as well. Tony Evans talked about, I think that this is clever, and so I liked it. He said, instead of debating about critical race theory, we should be developing a kingdom race theology. And I'm like, oh, I like that. And so I think the first step is to really dive into our Bible and go, don't bring the furniture of this way of looking at the world to the Bible. Just start with the Bible, and it will become very obvious. God's not into this, and he wasn't from the beginning. And that'll help us identify the problem well, with biblical language. The second is, it seems to me we have to start with love. And that sounds basic, but I just want to underline it.
That's good.
I've noticed in my own church, because I've stepped in it with this issue. I pastor the United Nations, but I've also not done it perfectly all the time. And so there are those in the church who feel it's their responsibility to keep me accountable, be my watchdog. But that's not a posture of love at all. And if we are doing that to each other as Christians, love hopes all things, believes all things, endures all things. Love is believing the best and rooting for each other. But if I'm sitting there side-eyeing what y'all are doing or what they're doing, I'm already posturing myself unlovingly. I'm posturing my heart cynically toward you because I'm just waiting for you to screw up so I can go, I got to speak truth to power, which, by the way, the Bible never asks you to do. That's not a moral imperative the Bible gives you, or me either. We're supposed to love our neighbor. The third is to move to repentance instead of figuring out how this is how I face a conflict resolution. Remove the log from my eye before I get mad about the speck in your eye. So though I seem to be asked to talk about critical race theory a lot, I don't talk a lot about it in my own church because I'm just trying to figure out, okay, how do we do this better? I just want to be faithful here. I'm glad to talk about this because I think ideas are interesting, but I'm not going to pretend to fix evangelicalism or the church. There's 3 billion people who are supposedly worshiping Jesus right now. I have no idea how to fix them. I'm going to work on my church, which would mean I can move to repentance when I didn't do that the right way, or I wish I'd handled that differently. Okay, well, you mean I'm a sinner saved by sheer grace? Okay. Still, is that still the answer? And then I think this is going to frustrate a lot of young people, but my responsibility is commensurate to my proximity. What happened to George Floyd is tragic. It's horrible. I can't watch the video. I could only watch it once. It turned my stomach. It is worth all of the moral disgust that I can muster. I can't do a lot to fix that. I can't fix what happened to George Floyd because I'm not there. I have no power in that. Now, what I can do is go, okay, but not here though, and go, okay, and be proactive about, okay, what's going on in my patch? I can't fix Washington. I don't vote on the House of Representatives. I don't vote in the Senate. I'm not as responsible to what President Biden does as I am to what I do, and that's what I mean. So we have to let tragedy, when it happens, maybe deepen our commitment or our sense of responsibility to what we're close to. Right? Like I gotta do it well here, as much as I can, and make sure something like that never happens, in my city. That would be, I think, I mean, just try to imagine that world, right? Where instead of calling out every issue of horrible injustice that comes across our news feed to feel morally superior or to share our deep angst at a thing, if instead we just diligently worked when we saw it to fix whatever version of that exists in our own backyard.
Yeah.
Like, isn't that a world you want to live in? I want to live there.
Yeah, no, it really is. And I think, and I think that's a good way to kind of close it up. I think, what I always try to do this whole podcast, bring it to a street level. And I thought there were some thoughts. Again, we pulled it up high to understand critical theory. The one thing why I wanted to bring Adam on, because we really don't talk about it a lot at Engage because of what Adam ultimately said. I'm like, most people talking about, critical theory right now, most of them have no idea what they're talking about, first of all, and I love how Mark Sayers said it recently. Most people who rail about critical theory actually act like critical theorists. And it's, I'm like, oh man, that's one of those Sayers moments, what I'm saying? It's like, oh yeah, you're right. Because the other thing is like, what are we doing to fix what we do? Because anxiety and frustration and real stuff. I mean, again, I want to see our nation be what it needs to be. And so I feel like sometimes I'll talk on a bigger picture because honestly, being in the trenches of actually trying to see it fixed. That's the thing. I really don't talk to people. I don't want to talk to people about it and argue with it. If you're not in the trenches trying to see it fixed, if you're not really working toward diverse relationships, if you're not really trying, how am I solving problems, then what are we talking? Because what you're doing, the rest of you're doing, you're talking to theory. Like it's not real. Like you're not a practitioner.
Right.
And I think that's what I want everybody to take from what Adam said is like, man, I love that idea of starting from the Bible, but then saying, man, what are we doing to solve problems around us? Like, what problems are you solving? Stop worrying about what everyone else is saying. Stop whatever. What problems are you solving in the world that you actually have power over to be able to say? If it's only right now in your home, man, what are you doing to help your children? Because I'm telling you right now, I do this with my children right now. They're all having to deal with this. My kids going to school, they're having to think through this stuff like, oh, I have to walk them through it. And then their friends come over. And their friends' parents have certain views and certain political views, and I'm like, no, hey, let's. And so now that's the world I have. So now we're working there. And so I think from a street level, it's like, man, what are you doing to take this gospel? What are you doing to take this kingdom and actually be able to solve problems around it? So, well, Adam, man, we appreciate it. We appreciate you really helping us. I mean, it was really helpful to start up high, to come down. And again, I know a lot of these thoughts, we were just trying to, again, that's the point of this podcast is just to kind of let's talk through it, let's figure it out, and let's see what kind of sticks, what doesn't. So, man, we really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate the time to get to talk to you guys too.